On the level of idea, Ralph Waldo Emerson, on the surface anyway, seems not overly hard to grasp. In particular, if you look at his first book, the 1836 Nature, a very short book, really an essay. If you look at that and treat it conceptually, you can see rather quickly that this is a writer who values the natural world, that he values immediate experience of this natural world, that he believes that the natural world is the origin of some of the most important parts of human experience, such as beauty, language, ethics. And you believe that ultimately this is someone who is trying to liberate readers from the traditions of the past. Sorry. Someone who's trying to liberate readers from the past and help them experience the present right here, right now. He begins the essay, Our Age is Retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, criticisms. Basically saying that our age right now is too fixated on imitating the past. Our age right now is too fixated on worshiping the past. And in doing so, basically, metaphorically speaking, is building coffins for dead people. Because the past is dead, the past is gone. What is alive? What is present? This here, right now. So these are the main conceptual messages of the essay. In general, we could talk about others. He has a few things to say about epistemology, for instance, ways of knowing. He's interested in this distinction between reason with a big R and understanding with a big U. We'll talk about that later on. The real action for Emerson is really not on the level of idea. You can find most of the ideas in Emerson in someone like, say, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the British Romantic poet, whose prose Emerson read quite assiduously. Also, you can find a lot of Emerson in the German idealist Immanuel Kant. The real action for Emerson is on the level of language. And you'll often find that Emerson's language, his diction, his syntax, his imagery, his metaphors, his tropes, his figures, you'll often find that these either concretely embody the ideas in really interesting ways, or sometimes work against the ideas in really interesting ways. Let's get a flavor for this by looking at the very first paragraph of Nature. Now, again, it's important to note that Emerson's Nature really hit New England intellectual culture like a bomb. It just exploded the pieties of this world, which was largely a world of Unitarian theology or even Calvinist theology. So for Emerson to say we shouldn't gain truth through organized religion, but through immediate contact with nature, well, this was seen as rather blasphemous. So the work really profoundly affected his world. And for some writers, this is the first true American literary work because it tries very hard to address the American scene right here, right now. In any case, the introduction goes like this. I've already cited some of it. Our Age is Retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, and criticism. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. Why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should not we have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs? Embosomed for a season in nature, whose floods of life stream around and through us, and invite us by the powers they supply to action proportioned to nature, why should we grope among the dry bones of the past, or put the living generation into masquerade out of its faded wardrobe? The sun shines today also. There is more wool and flax in the fields. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. Now, syntactically, this is a fascinating paragraph. Let's just notice that the first three sentences are very simple syntactically. And they're repetitious. Our age is retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers. It writes biographies. So you have subject, verb, predicate, nominative. Our age is retrospective. You have subject, verb, object. It builds the sepulchres. Subject, verb, object. Biographies, histories, criticism. So why do you think Emerson chose to write these first three sentences in such simple, repetitive forms? Well, the form reinforces the content. The sentences are about stasis. They're about repetition. They're about the ability to embrace change. So it makes sense that the first three sentences would have this kind of monotonous form. So this is just one example of how Emerson's language corresponds to his meaning, how the form corresponds to the content. Then suddenly the syntax opens up as the ideas open up. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. So more complicated syntax. As the syntax opens up, so Emerson is trying to open his readers up and saying, these people in the past saw nature face to face. Why can't we see it face to face? And then he activates us and invites us actually to see the immediate face-to-face with two very long, complicated rhetorical questions. Of course, the question pulls us in, it forces us to participate, and the expansive syntax, again, opens us up more in terms of consciousness, but also the way the words move suggests a kind of flow. And ultimately, this paragraph is a celebration of nature, not as something static, but as something dynamic, a current, flow, flux. Why should not we have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs? So why can't we have revelation right now and not simply study religion as history? Opening us up. And then, embosomed for a season in nature, whose floods of life stream around and through us and invite us by the powers they supply to action proportioned to nature, why should we grope among the dry bones of the past or but the living generation and to masquerade out of its faded wardrobe? What does it mean to be embosomed in nature? Well, embosomed in nature suggests that nature is maternal. Nature is our mother. And the way that we are nourished through nature is through the floods of life streaming out of our mother. So to participate in nature is to enter into a current. And we ultimately are invited by nature to express our own power. Nature is a power, and we should act in such a way that our power corresponds to nature. Given that this is the situation, why? A second rhetorical question. Why should we grope among the dry bones of the past? Now here Emerson is alluding to an important moment in the book of Ezekiel, the so-called Valley of the Dry Bones, where Ezekiel, one of the main prophets of what Christians call the Old Testament, along with Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel looks at these dry bones in a valley and he starts prophesying to them, and they start to come to life, symbolizing how the house of Israel will come to life again. Currently, they're not in that state. So notice that Emerson is saying we are all like Ezekiel, but we're groping among the dry bones of the past. And if we are paying attention to our current age, we're putting our current energies, our current powers into faded clothing. We need new textiles, new texts. So basically he seems to be saying, let us be our own Ezekiels. Let us not mimic a prophet from the past. Let us not mimic Ezekiel. Let us be Ezekiel ourselves in our own way. And as a new Ezekiel, let's find textiles, text, words, language appropriate to our experience right here, right now, without simply borrowing the language, the concepts of the past. Emerson, in his notebook, said, why cannot we too write our own Bibles? You can see why his culture found him blasphemous, because basically he's saying that we shouldn't worship someone like Ezekiel. We should try to be Ezekiel. The extension being, and this shows up in a later essay based on an address he gave to the Harvard Divinity School, basically saying that why should we try to imitate Jesus? Why don't we try to be Jesus ourselves in our own way? You can see why this is quite offensive to a lot of Christians in his time. Now it's almost like the essay itself has come to life syntactically, rhetorically. And then he slows it down again, slows it back down. The sun shines today also. That's part of the rhythm of this paragraph, this kind of contraction, expansion, contraction. But notice that the sentences in the last part, even though they are somewhat simplistic as the early ones are, they bear a kind of energy of meaning that the first sentences do not. The sun shines today also. There's more wool and flax in the fields. Wool and flax, what do you need wool and flax for? Oh, to weave. So again, Emerson's playing on this idea that textiles, weavings, are the same as texts. Textile, text, both come from the same Latin root. So let's find materials to create our own text right now. Why? Well, there are new lands, new men, new thoughts. This is a rhetorical figure called polysyndeton, where you have a connection of different items in a series by commas with no conjunctions. New lands, new men, new thought. So there's repetition there, but notice the repetition is on new, not old, old, old. Let us demand. This let us, is he commanding us? Let us do that, as if to say, do this. But also there's something along these lines of let there be light, which God says to open up the creation myth in the book of Genesis. Let there be. You should do this. Let there be. This is the case. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. So this is just an example of how Emerson uses his language to reflect, mimic, embody the meanings of his words. So I want you to pay attention as you go through Emerson to how he's using, again, all the various devices to express his meanings. Even though Emerson writes in prose, it's instructive to treat Emerson as if he's a poet writing in prose. Emerson says later on in his essay, The Poet, that there really should be no difference between prose and poetry. If prose is alive as poetry is, if prose is dense and nuanced as poetry is, then there really is no difference.